When three corporate killers corner a terrified lawyer at a family pizza night, they have no idea the quiet single father at table 7 once carried the Navy SEAL trident. Michael Kane buried his lethal past to raise his daughter in peace, but some debts to the dead can never be ignored. Tonight, Sophie will discover her daddy isn't just a plumber. He's a weapon that powerful men should fear. Follow this explosive story to the end and comment on your city so I can see how far this tale of justice and redemption travels across the world. The fluorescent lights of Tony's family diner cast their familiar warm glow across red vinyl booths as Michael Kane watched his 8-year-old daughter Sophie carefully arrange pepperoni slices on her pizza slice into a perfect smiley face. Her tongue poked out slightly in concentration, the same way it did when she worked on her homework at their kitchen table back home. "Daddy, look!" Sophie held up her creation proudly, grease glistening on her small fingers. "Mr. Pizza is happy tonight." Michael's weathered face softened into a genuine smile, the kind that seemed to erase years of invisible weight from his shoulders. "He sure is, sweetheart. Think he's happy because it's our special Friday night?" "Maybe," Sophie giggled, taking a careful bite that left Mr. Pizza with a lopsided grin. "Or maybe because you promised we could get ice cream after." "Did I promise that?" Michael raised an eyebrow in mock confusion, his calloused hands that had held both wrenches and weapons, now gently wiping sauce from his daughter's chin with a paper napkin. "Daddy." Sophie's eyes went wide with indignation. "You totally promised." "You said if I got all my spelling words right this week, we could get the double chocolate chip." Michael chuckled, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest. At 34, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen the world's darkest corners, but chose to focus on its brightest lights. Tonight, that light was his daughter's laughter, echoing through their favorite corner booth at Tony's. The diner was exactly what small-town America was supposed to feel like. Checkered floors worn smooth by decades of work boots and Sunday shoes, walls lined with photographs of local high school football teams and proud military families, and the constant hum of conversation mixing with the sizzle of the grill. Tony Marcelli himself worked behind the counter, his thick Italian accent calling out orders to his wife Maria, who had been serving coffee and comfort food to 3 generations of families. This was their ritual. Every Friday night for the past 2 years, since Michael had moved them to the quiet town of Cedar Falls after everything changed, Sophie would finish her homework. Michael would close up his plumbing business for the weekend, and they'd drive the 10 minutes to Tony's in his well-maintained pickup truck. It was routine, it was safe, and it was theirs. Michael had built their entire life around safety and routine. The mortgage on their small 2-bedroom house was modest enough that his plumbing work easily covered it. Sophie attended Cedar Falls Elementary, where the biggest drama was usually which kid forgot their lunch money. They went to church on Sundays, not because Michael was particularly religious, but because it was what normal families did, and normal was what he desperately wanted to give his daughter. Nobody in Cedar Falls knew that Michael Kane had once been Master Chief Petty Officer Michael Kane, Navy SEALs Team 6. Nobody knew about the missions in places that didn't officially exist, about the men he'd killed in defense of freedom, about the brothers he'd lost in mountains and deserts half a world away. They saw a quiet widower who fixed their leaky pipes with steady hands and never charged more than fare. They saw a devoted father who coached Little League and helped with school fundraisers. That was exactly how Michael wanted it. "Earth to Daddy." Sophie waved her small hand in front of his face, bringing him back to the present. "You got that look again." "What look is that, kiddo?" "The one where you're thinking about something far away. Mommy used to get that look too before." Michael felt his chest tighten. Sarah had been gone for 3 years now, taken by cancer when Sophie was just 5. Those had been the hardest months of his life, watching his wife fade while trying to explain to a kindergartner why Mommy was getting thinner and more tired each day. Sarah's death had been the final push that drove him away from the teams, away from a life of constant deployment and danger toward this quiet existence where his daughter could grow up with at least one parent always present. "Sorry, sweetheart. Just thinking about how lucky I am to have my best girl all to myself tonight." Sophie beamed, her earlier concern forgotten. "I'm your best girl forever and ever, right? Forever and ever plus infinity." It was their special phrase, the one that had started when Sophie was afraid of monsters under her bed. Michael would tuck her in and promise that his love for her was forever and ever plus infinity, which was bigger than any monster could ever be. The diner's bell chimed as the front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cool October air. Michael's eyes automatically tracked the movement. Old habits from a life where situational awareness meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. A woman entered, maybe 30 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a professional bun, and wearing a charcoal gray business suit that looked expensive but lived in. She paused just inside the doorway, her green eyes scanning the diner with the quick, nervous movements of someone who wasn't quite sure they wanted to be there. Her gaze lingered on the exit, then swept across the scattered evening customers. A trucker finishing his coffee at the counter, an elderly couple sharing a piece of apple pie, a group of teenagers celebrating someone's birthday in the back corner booth. The woman clutched a leather briefcase against her chest like a shield and chose a table near the middle of the diner, her back to the wall. Another automatic habit that Michael recognized: never sit with your back exposed to the room. "Daddy, why is that lady scared?" Michael looked down at Sophie, surprised by her observation. His daughter had always been perceptive, picking up on emotions and tensions that other kids her age might miss. It was both a blessing and a concern for a father who was trying to shelter her from the world's harsher realities. "What makes you think she's scared, sweetheart? She keeps looking at the door. And her hands are shaky, see?" Sophie pointed discreetly. The woman was indeed trembling slightly as she opened her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. Before Michael could respond, the bell chimed again. This time, 3 men entered in a way that immediately shifted the atmosphere of the diner. They weren't dressed like the usual Cedar Falls crowd. Expensive suits, polished shoes, and movements that spoke of purpose rather than casual dining. The lead man was tall and lean, with silver hair slicked back and cold blue eyes that surveyed the room like a predator calculating angles. The 2 men flanking him were younger, broader, with the kind of build that came from serious gym time and possibly serious violence. One had a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, while the other kept his right hand suspiciously close to his jacket. They didn't wait to be seated. Instead, they walked directly toward the auburn-haired woman's table with the confidence of men who were used to getting what they wanted. Michael felt something cold settle in his stomach. The tactical part of his brain that he'd tried so hard to suppress began automatically cataloging details: 3 potential hostiles, probably armed civilian environment, with multiple innocents, including his daughter, exits limited, no backup, no weapons except... He forced himself to stop. This wasn't Afghanistan or Somalia. This was Tony's Diner in Cedar Falls, Ohio, where the most dangerous thing that usually happened was someone getting food poisoning from leaving potato salad in the sun too long at the church picnic. But the woman, Isabella, he could hear one of the men call her, had gone completely pale. Her hands were no longer just trembling. They were shaking badly enough that the papers she'd been holding scattered across the table. "Isabella Ward," the silver-haired man said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quieter diner. Other conversations had begun to die down as people sensed the tension. "We need to talk." "I told you on the phone, Mr. Davidson." Isabella's voice was steady despite her obvious fear. "I have nothing to discuss with Blackwater Industries." Blackwater Industries. Michael knew that name, though he wished he didn't. They were one of the major defense contractors that had made billions during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They also had a reputation for playing fast and loose with regulations when it came to protecting their profits. "I think you do," Davidson replied, sliding uninvited into the booth across from her. His two companions remained standing, effectively boxing her in. "Especially considering the unfortunate documents you seem to have come into possession of." Tony Marcelli looked up from behind the counter, his face creased with concern. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where everyone looked out for everyone else, and three strangers intimidating a woman in his diner didn't sit well with the old Italian. "Hey!" Tony called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had run his establishment for 30 years. "You boys order something, or you need to move along." The scarred man turned toward Tony with a look that could have frozen hell. "This is a private conversation, old man. Mind your business." That was when Michael knew this situation was about to go very, very bad. "Daddy," Sophie's voice was small, confused. "Why are those men being mean to the lady?" Michael's training kicked in automatically. Threat assessment. 3 hostiles, unknown weapon status, but probable civilian casualties, likely. If situation escalated, daughter in immediate danger zone. Mission parameters: protect Sophie. Minimize civilian casualties. Neutralize threat, if necessary. But this wasn't a mission. This was supposed to be pizza night with his little girl. "Sophie," he said quietly, his voice taking on a tone she'd never heard before, calm, controlled, and carrying an undercurrent of absolute authority. "I need you to do exactly what Daddy says, okay?" "Okay," she whispered, her eyes wide but trusting. "Slide down under the table, but don't go anywhere else. Stay right there and don't come out until I tell you. Can you do that for me?" "But Daddy," Sophie. The single word carried enough weight that she immediately scooted off her side of the booth and tucked herself under the table without another question. Back at Isabella's table, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Those documents belong to Blackwater Industries," Davidson was saying, his voice low, but carrying in the increasingly quiet diner. "They were stolen property, and we want them back." "They're evidence of criminal activity," Isabella shot back, some steel entering her voice. "Evidence that your company has been defrauding the government for years, getting soldiers killed with defective equipment and covering it up." "Careful, Miss Ward. Slander is a serious accusation. So is treason." The word hung in the air like a live grenade. Michael could see other patrons beginning to shift uncomfortably, some reaching for purses and wallets as they prepared to leave. The teenagers in the back booth were whispering urgently to each other, their earlier celebration forgotten. Davidson's facade of civility began to crack. "You have no idea what you're playing with. Some things are bigger than one idealistic lawyer's sense of justice. My father died because of your company's negligence." Isabella's voice rose slightly, emotion breaking through her professional composure. "Captain James Barnes, 3rd Marine Division. His unit was using Blackwater-supplied body armor that you knew was defective. Armor that you kept selling to save money on manufacturing costs." Captain James Barnes. The name hit Michael like a physical blow. He knew that name. He knew it very well. Captain Barnes had been the Marine liaison officer attached to Michael's SEAL team during a particularly nasty operation in Helmand Province 4 years ago. A good officer, a better man who had saved Michael's life, when an IED had left him pinned down and bleeding in a Taliban kill zone. Barnes had charged through enemy fire to pull Michael to safety, taking shrapnel in the process, but never complaining about it. 2 months later, Captain Barnes had been killed when his unit was ambushed, and his body armor failed to stop rounds that it should have easily defeated. Michael had attended the funeral, had watched a flag-draped coffin being lowered into the ground, while a young woman with auburn hair, Barnes's daughter, stood at graveside with tears streaming down her face. Isabella Ward was James Barnes's daughter, and these men were threatening her. The cold feeling in Michael's stomach was rapidly being replaced by something much hotter and infinitely more dangerous. This wasn't just about some corporate intimidation anymore. This was about a debt of honor to a fallen brother in arms. Your father was a soldier, Davidson continued, oblivious to the volcano he was sitting next to. He understood that sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. You should understand that too. The greater good, Isabella's voice was incredulous. You mean Blackwater's profit margins? I mean national security. Those documents contain classified information that could compromise ongoing operations. People could die if they're made public. People already died because of what's in those documents. Davidson leaned forward, his mask finally slipping completely. Listen carefully, Miss Ward. You're going to hand over those documents, and you're going to forget you ever saw them. You're going to drop your investigation, stop making noise, and go back to whatever small-town law practice will have you. Because if you don't, he let the threat hang in the air. If I don't what? Isabella challenged, though Michael could see her hands shaking again. Davidson smiled, and it was a cold, ugly thing. Your father wasn't the only Barnes who could have an accident. That was enough. Michael stood up from his booth, the movement smooth and controlled, despite the rage building inside him. At 6 feet 2 inches and 200 pounds of muscle earned through years of military training and physical labor, he cut an imposing figure even in his casual flannel shirt and jeans. Excuse me, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the diner. Is there a problem here? Davidson looked up, annoyed at the interruption. This is a private conversation, friend. Why don't you mind your own business? Well, you see, Michael said, taking a step closer to their table, when 3 men start threatening a woman in front of my daughter, that kind of becomes my business. The scarred man turned to face Michael fully, his hand moving closer to his jacket. You really don't want to get involved in this, pal. Maybe not, Michael agreed, his tone remaining conversational. But I'm going to anyway. He could feel the attention of everyone in the diner now. Tony had stopped pretending to work and was watching intently. The elderly couple had frozen with their forks halfway to their mouths. Even the teenagers had gone quiet. This woman is coming with us, Davidson said, standing up. He was slightly taller than Michael, but carried himself with the soft confidence of a man who had others do his violence for him. She has something that belongs to my employers. Funny thing about that, Michael replied, taking another step closer. She doesn't look like she wants to go anywhere with you. Isabella was staring at him with a mixture of hope and terror. She probably thought he was just some good Samaritan who had no idea what he was walking into. She had no way of knowing that he had been in firefights with some of the most dangerous men on earth, or that he owed her father a debt that could never truly be repaid. Last warning, the third man said, the one who hadn't spoken yet. Walk away. No, Michael said simply. Davidson sighed theatrically. Mr. Torres, would you please explain to our good Samaritan here why he should reconsider his heroic impulses? The scarred man, Torres, smiled and reached inside his jacket. Michael could see the outline of a shoulder holster could read the man's intentions in his body language and the cold calculation in his eyes. This was the moment where everything changed, where the quiet life he had built for himself and Sophie collided with the violent world he had tried to leave behind, where Master Chief Petty Officer Michael Kane would have to surface again, whether he wanted to or not, because there were some things that couldn't be walked away from, some debts that couldn't be ignored, some lines that couldn't be crossed. And threatening Captain Barnes's daughter was definitely crossing that line. "Sophie," Michael called out quietly, never taking his eyes off Torres. "Stay exactly where you are, sweetheart. Don't move, don't look, don't come out no matter what you hear. Promise me." "I promise, Daddy," came a small voice from under the table. Torres's hand emerged from his jacket, holding a Glock 19, but he made the mistake of trying to be subtle about it, keeping the weapon low and close to his body. He obviously planned to intimidate rather than shoot immediately, a tactical error that would cost him dearly. "Like I said," Torres growled, "you really don't want to." Michael moved. 4 years of civilian life hadn't dulled his reflexes or muscle memory. He stepped inside Torres's guard, faster than the man could react, his left hand clamping down on the gunman's wrist, while his right drove upward in a vicious uppercut that connected with Torres's solar plexus. The air exploded out of Torres's lungs in a whoosh, and the gun clattered to the floor. Before Torres could recover, Michael spun him around and drove his knee into the man's kidney, then followed up with an elbow strike to the base of his skull. Torres dropped like a sack of cement unconscious before he hit the checkered linoleum. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. The diner erupted in chaos. Several patrons screamed, chairs scraped against the floor as people scrambled to get away from the violence, and Tony was shouting something in rapid Italian while reaching for the phone behind the counter. The third man was faster than his partner had been, his own weapon already clearing leather as he adjusted his aim toward Michael. But Isabella Ward proved she was her father's daughter by grabbing her ceramic coffee mug and hurling it at the gunman's head. The improvised projectile connected with his temple in a spray of coffee and ceramic shards, ruining his aim just long enough for Michael to close the distance. This man was better trained than Torres, managing to get one wild shot off that shattered the front window of the diner before Michael's hand clamped down on his throat. Michael's thumb found the pressure point below the man's ear and squeezed. The gunman's eyes rolled back, and he joined his partner on the floor. Davidson had backed away from the violence, his face pale, but his hands steady as he reached for his own weapon. "You have no idea what you've just done," he snarled. "Sure I do," Michael replied, breathing steady despite having just taken down 2 armed men. "I stopped 3 assholes from threatening an innocent woman." "Innocent?" Davidson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Miss Ward is in possession of classified military documents. That makes her a traitor and a terrorist. Those documents prove your company sold defective equipment that got my father killed," Isabella shouted, finally finding her voice again. "Your father?" Davidson's eyes narrowed as he studied her face more carefully. "Barnes. Captain James Barnes. I should have made the connection sooner." "You knew my father." "I knew of him. Brave man. Unfortunate that he got caught up in circumstances beyond his control." Michael saw red. "Circumstances? You son of a bitch, you mean the defective armor your company sold to save a few bucks on manufacturing." Davidson's gun was fully clear now, a stainless steel .45 that he held with the practiced grip of someone who knew how to use it. "Stand down, soldier. You're out of your depth here." "Soldier?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think I'm a soldier?" "Please. The way you moved, the tactical awareness, the efficiency of your takedowns. You're military. Special operations, if I had to guess." which makes this even more unfortunate because it means you should understand the bigger picture here. Michael glanced down at Torres's unconscious form, then back up at Davidson. The bigger picture where defense contractors get rich selling garbage equipment to the men and women who put their lives on the line. The bigger picture where sometimes individual tragedies have to be accepted for the sake of national security, Davidson shot back. Do you think Captain Barnes would want his daughter to stop Holmes' ongoing operations just to satisfy her need for revenge? I think Captain Barnes would want the truth to come out so no other fathers die because some corporate executive wanted a bigger bonus. The standoff stretched out tension crackling between them like electricity. Michael could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had called the police. That was both good and bad. Good because it meant backup was coming. Bad because it meant this situation was about to get very complicated. You have 30 seconds to put that gun down before the cops get here, Michael said calmly. The police won't be a problem, Davidson replied. Blackwater Industries has contracts with law enforcement agencies across the state. We'll sort this out. You mean you'll cover it up? I mean we'll handle it appropriately. Isabella had been quiet during the exchange, but now she spoke up. The documents are already copies, she said. I've sent the originals to 3 different news outlets and the FBI. Davidson's face went white. You couldn't have. We've been monitoring your communications. I hand-delivered them yesterday. Isabella continued, a note of satisfaction in her voice. Before you started following me. So even if you kill me, even if you kill him, she nodded toward Michael. The truth is still going to come out. Michael saw the moment when Davidson made his decision. Saw it in the subtle shift of his shoulders, the way his grip tightened on the pistol, the cold calculation that came over his features. Then you've signed all our death warrants, Davidson said, and began to raise his weapon. Michael was already moving, diving to his left and rolling behind an overturned table as Davidson's first shot splintered the air where he had been standing. Isabella screamed and dropped to the floor, covering her head with her hands. Stay down, Michael shouted to everyone in the diner as Davidson fired twice more bullets, punching holes in the vinyl booth seating. Michael came up from behind the table with Torres's dropped Glock in his hand, muscle memory taking over as he acquired his target and squeezed the trigger in one smooth motion. The bullet took Davidson's center mass, spinning him around and dropping him to the floor in a spreading pool of blood. Sudden silence fell over the diner, broken only by the sound of sirens getting closer and the quiet sobbing of terrified customers. Michael safed the weapon and set it on the floor, then immediately went to check on Sophie. She was still huddled under their table, her small body shaking, but otherwise unharmed. It's okay, sweetheart, he said softly, gathering her into his arms. It's over now. Daddy, you... Sophie couldn't seem to find the words. I know, baby. I know. But sometimes daddies have to do scary things to protect people. Isabella had picked herself up off the floor and was staring at Michael with a mixture of awe and confusion. Who are you? She asked quietly. Michael looked at her for a long moment, seeing her father's eyes staring back at him. Captain Barnes, who had risked everything to save a stranger's life in a foreign desert, who had died because corporate greed had valued profit over protection. My name is Michael Kane, he said finally. I served with your father in Afghanistan. Isabella's eyes went wide. You knew him. He saved my life, Michael said simply. Guess tonight I got to return the favor. The police burst through the front door, then weapons drawn and voices shouting commands. Michael immediately raised his hands, keeping one arm protectively around Sophie. I'm the one who called it in, Tony Marcelli announced loudly. These 3 men came in threatening the lady. This man here, he pointed at Michael, he protected her. As the paramedics worked on the wounded Davidson and the unconscious gunman, and the police began taking statements from witnesses, Michael found himself wondering how he was going to explain this to Sophie. How he was going to explain that her daddy used to be someone very different, someone capable of violence that she should never have to see. But as he looked down at his daughter's trusting face and across the room at Isabella Ward, clutching her father's evidence against her chest, Michael realized that some secrets couldn't be kept forever. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The quiet life he had built in Cedar Falls was over. But as he thought about Captain Barnes, about the other soldiers who had died because of corporate greed and covered-up negligence, Michael began to wonder if maybe it was time to stop running from who he used to be. Maybe it was time to be that person again. For justice. For honor. For the daughter of a man who had saved his life. And for Sophie, who deserved to grow up in a world where the good guys actually won sometimes. The fluorescent lights of the Cedar Falls Police Department cast harsh shadows across the interview room, where Michael sat with Sophie curled up in his lap, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. She hadn't let go of him since the paramedics had finished checking her over, and he wasn't about to push her away now. The events at Tony's diner had shattered more than just the front window. They had blown apart the carefully constructed normalcy he'd spent 2 years building. Detective Ray Morrison, a heavy-set man in his 50s with kind eyes and 20 years of small-town policing under his belt, sat across from them, with a steaming cup of coffee and a stack of witness statements. Morrison had been one of the first responders, and Michael could tell the veteran cop was still trying to process what had happened in his quiet jurisdiction. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly, Mr. Kane," Morrison said, his voice gentle but probing. 3 armed men entered Tony's diner, threatened Miss Ward, and you intervened to protect her and the other customers. "That's right," Michael replied, his hand stroking Sophie's hair as she dozed fitfully against his shoulder. The adrenaline crash had hit her hard, and exhaustion was finally winning out over terror. "And you've never seen any of these men before tonight?" "Never." Morrison consulted his notes. "Tony Marcelli says you moved like you had training, military training. Care to elaborate on that?" Michael had been dreading this question, knowing it would come eventually. In a perfect world, he could have deflected it, maybe claimed some martial arts classes or security work. But there had been too many witnesses, and his actions had been too precise, too efficient for civilian self-defense training. "Navy," he said simply. 8 years. "What kind of work did you do in the Navy?" The pause stretched out long enough that Morrison raised an eyebrow. Sophie stirred in Michael's arms, mumbling something about Mr. Pizza in her sleep. "Special operations," Michael finally admitted. Morrison's pen stopped moving. "SEAL. Yeah. Jesus Christ." Morrison leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking at Michael with new eyes. "No wonder you took down 3 armed men like they were children. How long have you been out?" 4 years. Moved here after my wife died, wanted to give Sophie a normal life. Well, that plan just went to hell in a handbasket." Morrison closed his notebook and rubbed his face with both hands. "Mr. Kane, I need you to understand something. 2 of those men are in intensive care, and the 3rd one, Davidson, he's probably not going to make it through the night. You killed a man tonight." "A man who was about to shoot an innocent woman," Michael said quietly. "A man who threatened my daughter by being in the same room with a loaded gun." "I'm not questioning your actions," Morrison said quickly. "Every witness says you saved lives tonight. But this is going to bring attention, a lot of attention. And from what Miss Ward has been telling us about these Blackwater Industries documents, it's going to be the kind of attention that makes people nervous." Through the interview room's small window, Michael could see Isabella Ward, sitting in another room down the hall, speaking animatedly to a man in an expensive suit who had arrived 20 minutes ago, claiming to be her attorney. She caught his eye through the glass and offered a small wave, which he returned with a nod. "What kind of people are we talking about?" Michael asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The kind that can make a lot of trouble for a single father trying to raise his daughter in peace," Morrison replied. "The kind that have lawyers and political connections and resources you don't want to think about." "Are you saying I should be worried?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying Michael's face. "I'm saying that men like Davidson don't usually operate alone, and companies like Blackwater don't usually take losses like this lying down." Before Michael could respond, there was a knock on the interview room door. A young officer poked his head in, looking harried. "Detective Morrison. There's a federal agent here to see you. Says it's about the shooting." Morrison muttered something under his breath that sounded distinctly unflattering about federal interference. "What agency?" "FBI. Agent Sarah Chen. She's got credentials and an attitude." "Of course she does." Morrison stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Mr. Kane, you sit tight for a few minutes. And whatever happens, don't say anything to anyone without a lawyer present." "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet, but the night's still young." Morrison left, and Michael found himself alone with his sleeping daughter and a growing sense that his carefully ordered world was about to become very complicated very quickly. Through the thin walls, he could hear raised voices from the hallway. Morrison arguing with someone who spoke with the crisp authority of federal law enforcement. Sophie stirred again, her eyes fluttering open to focus on his face. "Daddy, are we going home soon?" "I hope so, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Scared," she admitted, her voice small. "Those men were really bad, weren't they?" Michael considered his words carefully. Sophie had seen him hurt people tonight, had witnessed violence that no 8-year-old should ever have to see. He could try to explain it away, minimize it, but he had learned long ago that children often understood more than adults gave them credit for. Yes, they were bad men. They were trying to hurt that lady, and I couldn't let that happen. "Because you're a hero." The word hit him like a physical blow. Hero. If only she knew the things he had done, the people he had killed in dark places far from home. If only she knew about the nightmares that still woke him up some nights, about the faces that haunted his dreams. "I'm just your daddy," he said finally, "and my job is to protect you and keep you safe. But you protected the lady too. That makes you a hero." Before Michael could figure out how to respond to that, the interview room door opened again. A woman in her 30s entered, wearing a crisp black suit and carrying herself with the unmistakable bearing of federal authority. She had Asian features, short black hair, and eyes that missed nothing as they swept the room and cataloged every detail. "Mr. Kane, I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI." She held up her credentials for inspection. "I need to speak with you about what happened tonight. Detective Morrison told me not to talk to anyone without a lawyer." "Detective Morrison doesn't understand the scope of what we're dealing with here," Chen replied, pulling out a chair and sitting down without invitation. "This isn't just about a shooting in a small-town diner, Mr. Kane. This is about national security." Sophie had tensed in his arms at the sound of the stranger's voice, and Michael could feel her small body trembling slightly. "My daughter needs to get home," he said. "It's been a long night." "I understand that, and I sympathize, I really do. But 3 men are dead or dying because of what happened tonight, and the woman they were threatening is in possession of documents that could compromise ongoing military operations." Documents that prove a defense contractor has been selling defective equipment that gets soldiers killed, Michael countered. Chen's expression didn't change. That's not your concern. It is when one of those soldiers was Captain James Barnes, who saved my life in Afghanistan. Now Chen did react, her eyes sharpening with interest. You served with Captain Barnes. SEAL Team 6, Helmand Province, 2021. Barnes was the Marine liaison on Operation Fallen Angel. Good man. Didn't deserve to die because some corporate executive wanted to pad his bonus. Chen pulled out a tablet and began swiping through what looked like military records. Master Chief Petty Officer Michael Kane, 8 years active duty, multiple deployments, Navy Cross Silver Star, Purple Heart. She looked up from the tablet. Quite a record. What made you leave? My wife died. My daughter needed a father more than the Navy needed another operator. And yet here you are 4 years later, right back in the middle of a classified military operation. Michael felt something cold settle in his stomach. What classified operation? Chen glanced at Sophie, who was watching the conversation with wide, frightened eyes. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. My daughter stays with me. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of her. Mr. Kane, I don't think you understand. I understand plenty. Michael cut her off. I understand that 3 men with guns threatened an innocent woman in front of my child. I understand that those men worked for a company that's been defrauding the government and getting soldiers killed. And I understand that you're here trying to cover it up instead of investigating it. Chen's professional composure cracked slightly. It's not that simple. It never is it? There's always some bigger picture, some national security concern that justifies letting the bad guys walk away. Michael's voice was getting harder, edges of the old anger starting to show through. How many more soldiers have to die to protect Blackwater's profits? You think this is about profits? Chen leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Those documents that Miss Ward has don't just expose Blackwater's quality control issues. They contain details about classified weapons systems, troop movements, operational security protocols. If they're made public, people will die. A lot of people. Michael studied her face, looking for tells for signs of deception. Years of interrogating prisoners and dealing with intelligence officers had taught him to read people, and Agent Chen was telling the truth as she understood it. Then maybe the real question is how a defense contractor got access to that kind of classified information in the first place, he said. That's above both our pay grades. Is it? Because it seems to me like that's exactly the kind of thing the FBI should be investigating. Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words. There are investigations ongoing, multiple investigations. But they take time and they require a delicate touch. Miss Ward's crusade could derail months of careful work. Or it could expose the truth. The truth isn't always the most important thing, Miss Kane. Sometimes stability matters more. Sophie had been listening to the conversation with the intensity that children bring to adult discussions they don't fully understand, but know are important. Now she spoke up, her voice small but clear. My teacher says telling the truth is always right, even when it's hard. Chen looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. Your teacher is a wise woman, sweetheart. But sometimes adults have to make complicated choices. Daddy says choices aren't complicated. You either do the right thing or you don't. Michael felt a surge of pride at his daughter's words, even as he recognized the uncomfortable truth in them. Sophie's right, he said. Captain Barnes died because Blackwater sold defective armor. Other soldiers died for the same reason. That's murder, Agent Chen, and covering it up makes you an accessory. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I've been there, Agent Chen. I've worn that armor, trusted my life to equipment that some contractor built. And I've seen what happens when profit margins matter more than the lives of the people who serve. Chen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Mr. Kane, but I'm going to be very clear with you. Miss Ward is going to disappear those documents. She's going to go back to whatever small-town law practice will have her, and she's going to forget this ever happened. And you're going to go back to fixing pipes and coaching Little League. And if we don't, Chen's expression hardened, then you'll discover that Blackwater Industries isn't the only organization with resources and connections. The federal government has a long memory and a longer reach. The threat hung in the air between them like poison gas. Michael felt Sophie tense in his arms, and he realized that his daughter was getting an education tonight in how the world really worked, in how power protected itself and crushed anyone who got in the way. Are you threatening my family, Agent Chen? I'm explaining reality to you, Mr. Kane. Sometimes reality is threatening. Before Michael could respond, the interview room door burst open, and Detective Morrison came in looking like he'd been through a blender. His hair was disheveled, his shirt was wrinkled, and he had the expression of a man who had just been steamrolled by forces beyond his control. Agent Chen, I need you to step outside for a moment, Morrison said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Detective, we're in the middle of outside, now. Chen looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Morrison's tone must have convinced her to choose her battles. She left without another word, though not before giving Michael a look that promised their conversation wasn't over. Morrison waited until the door closed behind her, then turned to Michael with exhaustion written across his face. Mr. Kane, I've been a cop for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what just happened out there. What do you mean? I mean, I had 3 federal agents, 2 military contractors, and a state prosecutor all show up in the last hour, all demanding different things. The feds want to classify everything that happened tonight. The contractors want to confiscate Miss Ward's documents, and the prosecutor wants to charge you with manslaughter. Michael felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. Manslaughter. Excessive force. They're saying you used deadly force against Davidson when a non-lethal response would have been sufficient. He was about to shoot Isabella Ward. I saw him make the decision. I believe you. Hell, everyone who was there believes you. But that doesn't matter if someone with enough juice wants to make an example out of you. Sophie had gone very still in Michael's arms, and he could feel her small body starting to shake again. She didn't understand all the legal terminology, but she understood enough to know that her daddy was in trouble. What are my options? Michael asked quietly. Morrison sat down heavily, looking older than his years. Honestly, not many. The feds are going to do whatever the feds are going to do, and local law enforcement doesn't have much say in it. But I can tell you this. Miss Ward's lawyer is raising holy hell out there. Apparently, she's got some connections of her own. What kind of connections? The kind that make federal agents nervous. I don't know the details, but her lawyer made some phone calls, and suddenly everyone's being very polite and very careful about proper procedure. Through the window, Michael could see Isabella Ward standing in the hallway, her arms crossed and her expression fierce as she spoke to her lawyer. Even exhausted and traumatized, she carried herself with the same unflinching determination that her father had shown in Afghanistan. Detective Morrison, Michael said carefully. What would happen if I wanted to take Sophie and leave town tonight? Morrison's expression grew grim. I'd strongly advise against that, Mr. Kane. Right now, you're a witness and possibly a suspect. You start running and you become a fugitive. That's not a line you want to cross, especially with a little girl depending on you. And if I stay, Then you trust the system to work the way it's supposed to work, which granted doesn't always happen, but it's better than the alternative. Michael looked down at Sophie, who had dozed off again, despite the chaos around her. She looked so small and vulnerable in his arms, so trusting that her daddy would figure out a way to keep her safe. The weight of that trust was almost crushing. How long do I have to decide? Not long. They're going to want to move on this quickly before word gets out, and it becomes a media circus. My guess is they'll want everything wrapped up by morning. The interview room door opened again, and Isabella Ward entered with her lawyer in tow. Up close, Michael could see that she had her father's eyes, green and determined and completely uncompromising when she believed she was right. "Mr. Kane," she said, extending her hand, "I never properly thanked you for what you did tonight. I'm Isabella Ward, and this is my attorney, Marcus Webb." Michael shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of someone who worked with her hands as well as her mind. "You don't need to thank me, Miss Ward. Your father saved my life once. I owed him." "Marcus has been explaining the legal situation to me," Isabella continued. "It sounds like we're both in a considerable amount of trouble." Webb, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair, and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms, nodded grimly. "The federal government is claiming that Miss Ward's documents contain classified information that poses a threat to national security. They're invoking the Espionage Act." "The Espionage Act," Morrison whistled low. "That's serious business. Serious enough to put both of you in federal prison for a very long time," Webb confirmed. "However, there may be some options available to us." "What kind of options?" Michael asked. Webb glanced at Sophie, then back at Michael. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Michael said firmly. "Whatever you have to say it here. I'm not leaving my daughter alone with all this chaos going on." Webb nodded with understanding. "Very well. Miss Ward's documents don't just implicate Blackwater Industries in fraud and negligence. They also suggest corruption that goes much higher up the chain of command. We're talking about Pentagon officials, congressional oversight committees, possibly even cabinet-level involvement." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. How high up? High enough that bringing this to light could bring down some very powerful people. People who have a vested interest in making sure that doesn't happen. Which is why they're trying to bury it under national security claims, Isabella added, her voice bitter. They can't refute the evidence, so they're trying to classify it. "But here's the thing," Webb continued, his voice taking on the tone of a man who had found a weakness in his opponent's armor. "The classification has to be legitimate. If it can be shown that the government is using classification to cover up criminal activity rather than protect legitimate national security interests, then the Espionage Act claims fall apart." "And how do we prove that?" Michael asked. "By making sure the right people see these documents. People who can't be bought or intimidated. People who have the authority to investigate and the integrity to follow the evidence wherever it leads." Detective Morrison leaned forward, his cop instincts engaged. "What people are we talking about?" Webb smiled for the first time since entering the room. Isabella's father wasn't just a Marine captain. He was also the son of Senator Margaret Barnes, the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Michael's eyes widened. "Senator Barnes is Isabella's grandmother." "Was," Isabella corrected quietly. "She passed away 2 years ago. But her staff is still there, and they remember my father. More importantly, they remember the promises she made about rooting out defense contractor corruption." "So what's the plan?" Morrison asked. Webb pulled out his phone and showed them a number. "We call Senator Patricia Williams, the current chair of the Armed Services Committee. She and Senator Barnes were close friends, and she's been pushing for defense contractor oversight for years. If we can get these documents to her before the feds can shut us down." "Then what?" Michael asked. "We're still looking at federal charges. Sophie still loses her father." Isabella reached out and touched his arm gently. "Maybe not. If this becomes a congressional investigation, instead of a criminal prosecution, if the focus shifts to the real criminals instead of the whistleblowers, then we might have a chance." "That's a lot of maybes," Michael pointed out. "It's the only shot we have," Webb replied. "Unless you want to spend the next 20 years in federal prison while Blackwater continues to profit from defective equipment that gets soldiers killed." Michael looked down at Sophie, still sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around her. She trusted him to keep her safe, to make the right choices, to be the father she needed. But what was the right choice here? Keep his head down and hope the system worked, or stand up and fight, knowing that failure meant losing everything? The answer came to him in his daughter's own words. Choices aren't complicated. You either do the right thing or you don't. "Make the call," he said. Webb nodded and stepped outside to use his phone. Isabella took the chair that Agent Chen had vacated, studying Michael's face with curious eyes. "You really served with my father?" she asked. "Operation Fallen Angel 2021. We were tasked with taking out a Taliban weapons cache in the mountains outside Kabul. Intel was wrong and we walked into an ambush. Your father pulled me out of a kill zone while taking shrapnel from an IED." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "He never talked about his deployments much. Said the important thing was coming home to family. He was a good man. A good soldier. He didn't deserve what happened to him. None of them did. That's why this matters, Mr. Kane. That's why we can't let them bury this." Before Michael could respond, Webb returned with his phone still pressed to his ear. His expression was tense but hopeful. "Senator Williams is in Washington, but she's sending her chief of staff to meet us tonight. He's driving down from Columbus and should be here within the hour." "Tonight?" Morrison asked. "It's almost midnight." "Senator Williams takes defense contractor oversight very seriously," Webb explained, "especially when it involves potential criminal activity." Agent Chen chose that moment to return, and her expression when she saw Webb on the phone was thunderous. "Mr. Webb, I hope you're not doing what I think you're doing. I'm representing my client's interests, Agent Chen, which includes making sure she receives proper legal protection. Your client is in possession of classified documents. Any attempt to disseminate them further could be considered an act of treason." Webb smiled coldly. "Agent Chen, are you familiar with the congressional oversight provisions of the Intelligence Authorization Act? Because Senator Williams's staff certainly is." Chen's face went pale. "You can't be serious." "Completely serious. The Senate Armed Services Committee has legitimate oversight authority over defense contractor activities. Providing them with evidence of potential criminal activity is not only legal, it's required by law. Those documents are classified. By whom, under what authority, and for what legitimate national security purpose?" Webb's voice was gaining strength, like a prosecutor who had found the smoking gun. "Because if they're classified solely to cover up criminal activity, then that classification is invalid." Michael watched the exchange with growing admiration for Isabella's lawyer. Webb was clearly outmatching the federal agent using her own rules against her. "I'm going to need to speak with my superiors," Chen said finally. "You do that. In the meantime, my clients aren't going anywhere." Chen left again this time, with considerably less confidence than when she'd arrived. Morrison chuckled softly. "I've got to hand it to you, Mr. Webb. I've never seen anyone back down a federal agent like that. 20 years as a defense attorney teaches you a few things about fighting overreach," Webb replied. The key is knowing when they're bluffing and when they actually have the law on their side. Sophie stirred in Michael's arms, her eyes opening to focus on his face. "Daddy, what's happening?" "We're waiting to talk to some important people, sweetheart. People who might be able to help. The good guys." Michael glanced at Isabella, then at Webb, then at Detective Morrison. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, he felt a glimmer of hope. "Yeah, baby. The good guys." The next hour passed slowly, filled with hushed conversations and the distant sound of phones ringing in other parts of the police station. Michael could see federal agents conferring in small groups, their body language suggesting heated discussions about how to proceed. Finally, just after 1 a.m., a black sedan pulled up outside the station. A tall man in his 40s got out, straightened his tie, and walked through the front doors with the confident stride of someone who was used to being the smartest person in the room. "That'll be Thomas Brennan," Webb said with satisfaction. "Senator Williams's chief of staff, former prosecutor, former military intelligence, and currently one of the most feared investigators on Capitol Hill." Michael felt Sophie relax in his arms as the tension in the room began to shift. For the first time all night, it felt like they might actually have a chance. The real fight was just beginning. Thomas Brennan commanded the interview room from the moment he walked through the door, his presence shifting the entire dynamic, like a storm front moving across the prairie. At 43, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent years navigating the treacherous waters of Washington politics. But his sharp gray eyes held the calculating intensity of his former military intelligence career. Michael immediately recognized the type, the kind of man who could dissect a situation in seconds and find the weakness in any opponent's position. Brennan's handshake was firm but brief, his attention already moving to assess everyone in the room with the efficiency of a targeting computer. "Miss Ward," Brennan said, his voice carrying a slight Boston accent that spoke of working-class roots despite his expensive suit. "Senator Williams asked me to express her personal condolences regarding your father. Captain Barnes was mentioned in several committee hearings as an exemplary officer." Isabella's composure, which had held steady through hours of chaos, finally cracked slightly at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. That means a lot. Your grandmother was one of the finest senators I ever worked with," Brennan continued. "She would have been proud of what you're doing here tonight." Michael watched the exchange, noting how Brennan had immediately established emotional connection and moral authority before moving to business. It was masterful political theater, but it also felt genuinely compassionate. "Mr. Kane," Brennan turned his attention to Michael and Sophie, who was now awake but still clinging to her father's neck. "I understand you served with Captain Barnes in Afghanistan." "Yes, sir. He saved my life during Operation Fallen Angel." "I remember that operation. 18 Taliban killed major weapons cache, destroyed 0 American casualties, except for Captain Barnes's shrapnel wounds." The fact that Brennan knew operational details that were probably still classified told Michael everything he needed to know about the man's security clearance and connections. This wasn't some political hack. This was someone with real access to real information. "How much do you know about what happened here tonight?" Webb asked, settling into his role as the group's legal coordinator. Brennan pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what looked like official reports. "I know that 3 operatives working for Blackwater Industries attempted to intimidate Miss Ward into surrendering evidence of corporate malfeasance. I know that Mr. Kane intervened to protect her, resulting in 2 critical injuries and 1 fatality. And I know that the FBI is trying to classify this entire incident under the Espionage Act." "Can they do that?" Michael asked. "Technically, yes. The executive branch has broad authority to classify information as in the interest of national security. However, Brennan's smile was sharp as a blade. That classification must be legitimate and lawful. Using classification to cover up criminal activity is itself a federal crime. Agent Chen chose that moment to return, flanked by two other federal agents Michael hadn't seen before. Her expression was grim but determined, like someone who had received clear orders from above. "Mr. Brennan," she said without preamble, "I need you and your clients to understand that you're interfering with an ongoing federal investigation. This matter involves classified defense contracts and sensitive national security information." Brennan didn't even look up from his tablet. "Agent Chen, I presume I've been reading your personnel file. 15 years with the Bureau, solid record currently assigned to the Counterintelligence Division. Tell me, when did defense contractor fraud become a counterintelligence matter?" Chen's face flushed slightly. "When it involves the compromise of classified military specifications and operational security protocols." "Ah." Brennan finally looked up, his gray eyes boring into Chen with uncomfortable intensity. "So you're saying that Blackwater Industries had access to classified military specifications? That's interesting because their public contracts specifically exclude them from that level of clearance. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of..." "Of course you're not. Because discussing those details would reveal that someone in the Pentagon was illegally sharing classified information with private contractors. Someone who was probably being paid handsomely for that information." The room went dead silent. Michael could feel Sophie tense in his arms as she picked up on the sudden shift in atmosphere. Even Detective Morrison, who had been watching the proceedings with the bemused expression of a small-town cop in over his head, straightened up with interest. "That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Brennan," Chen said carefully. "It's not an accusation, Agent Chen. It's an inevitable conclusion based on the facts as you've presented them. Either Blackwater had legitimate access to classified information, in which case their contracts were fraudulent from the beginning, or they had illegitimate access, in which case someone in the government was committing treason." Webb leaned forward, with the expression of a lawyer who had just seen his opponent's case collapse. "Which is it, Agent Chen? Because either way, the real criminals aren't the people in this room." Chen looked like she wanted to argue, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. "I need to step outside for a moment," she said, her voice tight with stress. "Take your time," Brennan replied pleasantly. "We'll be here." As soon as Chen left, Brennan turned to Isabella with renewed focus. "Miss Ward, I need you to tell me exactly what's in those documents. Not summaries, not generalizations, specific details." Isabella looked to Webb, who nodded encouragingly. "Financial records showing payments from Blackwater to Pentagon officials. Purchase orders for body armor that didn't meet military specifications. Test results that were falsified to hide defects. And communication logs showing that Blackwater executives knew their equipment was failing in the field, but continued to ship it anyway." "Names," Brennan said simply. "I need names." Isabella took a deep breath. Deputy Defense Secretary Robert Morrison, Colonel Sarah Hayes from Army Procurement, General David Chen from... "Wait," Michael interrupted. "General David Chen? Any relation to Agent Chen?" Brennan's smile was razor-thin. "Her uncle, which explains why the FBI is so eager to classify this whole thing. They're not protecting national security. They're protecting one of their own." The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. This wasn't just about corporate fraud or even military corruption. This was about a federal agent using her position to cover up her family's involvement in a conspiracy that had gotten soldiers killed. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. "No wonder she wanted to bury this." "It gets worse," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength as she realized the full scope of what she was revealing. The documents show that General Chen wasn't just taking money from Blackwater. He was actively steering contracts away from legitimate suppliers and toward Blackwater, even when their bids were higher and their quality was lower. "How much money are we talking about?" Brennan asked. Isabella consulted her copies of the documents. Individual payments ranged from $50,000 to $500,000. Total payments over 3 years, approximately $12 million. The figure hung in the air like a death sentence. Michael felt sick thinking about how many soldiers had died because of equipment that failed to protect them all so a few officials could line their pockets. "Mr. Brennan," he said quietly, "what happens to those officials when this comes out? If we can prove the charges military officials face court-martial and federal prison, civilian officials face federal prosecution, and anyone who tried to cover it up faces obstruction of justice charges, including Agent Chen, especially Agent Chen." Sophie had been listening to the conversation with the wide-eyed attention that children bring to adult discussions they know are important, but don't fully understand. Now she spoke up, her voice small but clear. "Daddy, are the bad people going to go to jail?" Michael looked down at his daughter, seeing her father's determination reflected in her young eyes. "I hope so, sweetheart. That's what we're trying to make happen." "Good," Sophie said, with the absolute moral certainty that only children possess. "Bad people should go to jail." Agent Chen returned to the room with 2 additional agents, and Michael could immediately see that the dynamic had shifted. Chen's earlier confidence was gone, replaced by the desperate aggression of someone whose back was against the wall. "Mr. Brennan, I've spoken with my superiors and we're prepared to make a deal," Chen said, her voice carefully controlled. "What kind of deal?" Webb asked suspiciously. "Miss Ward surrenders all copies of the stolen documents, agrees never to discuss this matter publicly, and accepts a generous settlement for her inconvenience. Mr. Kane receives immunity from any criminal charges related to tonight's incident. Everyone goes home happy." Brennan laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "And the officials who took bribes, the soldiers who died because of defective equipment, what happens to them?" "That's not your concern." "Actually, Agent Chen, it's exactly my concern. You see, I represent the United States Senate, which has constitutional authority to investigate government corruption, and we take that responsibility very seriously." Chen's mask finally slipped completely. "You have no idea what you're playing with here, Brennan. This goes higher than you think, higher than you can imagine." "How high?" Brennan's voice was deceptively casual. "Cabinet-level White House staff, the president himself. I'm not saying anything more without talking to your uncle first," Brennan interrupted. "Because that's who you've been protecting this whole time, isn't it? General David Chen, the man who sold out American soldiers for money." Chen's face went white with rage. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can." Brennan held up his tablet showing what looked like bank records. "Funny thing about financial crimes, Agent Chen. There's always a paper trail. And when you know where to look, that trail leads to some very interesting places." Michael watched Chen's composure crumble in real time, and he felt a moment of something that might have been pity. She was a federal agent who had probably started her career wanting to serve her country, but family loyalty had led her down a dark path that was about to destroy everything she had worked for. "What do you want?" Chen asked, finally her voice barely above a whisper. "Full cooperation," Brennan replied. "Complete disclosure of all documents related to Blackwater Industries contracts. Names, dates, amounts, everything. And testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee." "I can't do that." It would destroy my uncle's life. Your uncle destroyed his own life when he decided to take blood money, Isabella said, her voice hard as steel. My father died because of equipment your uncle knew was defective. How many other fathers died the same way? Chen looked around the room, searching for any ally, any way out of the trap she had walked into. But there was none. Michael could see the moment when she realized that her only choice was between cooperation and criminal prosecution. If I cooperate, she said slowly, what guarantees do I have immunity from prosecution for obstruction of justice charges? Brennan replied. Your uncle gets military justice, which is usually more lenient than federal court. And your career survives assuming you can live with yourself. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was the only one Chen had. Michael watched her weigh her options, seeing the internal battle between family loyalty and professional duty playing out across her face. I need to make some phone calls, she said finally. Make them fast, Brennan replied. Senator Williams wants a preliminary report on her desk by tomorrow morning, and the full committee will want to schedule hearings within the week. Chen nodded numbly and left the room with her fellow agents. The moment the door closed behind them, the tension in the room seemed to evaporate like steam. Is it over? Isabella asked, her voice hopeful but cautious. The crisis phase is over, Brennan replied. But the real work is just beginning. Congressional investigations take months, sometimes years, and Blackwater Industries isn't going to just roll over and accept defeat. They'll fight this every step of the way. Michael felt Sophie relax against his chest as she finally allowed herself to believe that the immediate danger had passed. But Brennan's words reminded him that their troubles were far from over. What kind of fight are we talking about? He asked. Brennan's expression grew serious. Legal challenges, media campaigns, political pressure, maybe even physical intimidation. These people have billions of dollars at stake, Mr. Kane. They won't hesitate to use every weapon at their disposal, including violence, if they think they can get away with it. Detective Morrison, who had been listening to the conversation with growing alarm, finally spoke up. Mr. Brennan, are you saying these people might come after Mr. Kane and his daughter? I'm saying that corporate assassinations aren't unheard of when this much money is involved. 3 men with guns already tried to intimidate Miss Ward tonight. What makes you think they won't try again with different people? The cold reality of Brennan's words settled over the room like a blanket of ice. Michael realized that by getting involved tonight, by choosing to stand up and fight, he had painted a target on both himself and Sophie. What kind of protection can you offer? Webb asked. Limited, Brennan admitted. Congressional investigators don't have law enforcement authority, and federal protection would have to come through the same agencies that are compromised. Your best bet is probably private security and a very low profile until the hearings begin. Michael looked down at Sophie, who had dozed off again, despite the ongoing conversation. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, completely unaware that her life had just been turned upside down by forces beyond her control. Mr. Brennan, he said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Is this worth it? Is exposing this corruption worth the risk to my daughter's safety? Brennan was quiet for a long moment, studying Michael's face with those sharp gray eyes. Mr. Kane, how many soldiers do you think have died because of defective Blackwater equipment over the past 3 years? Michael thought about Captain Barnes, about the body armor that had failed when it was needed most. I don't know. Dozens, hundreds. Try thousands, Brennan said softly. We estimate that Blackwater's defective equipment has been responsible for approximately 3,000 combat deaths and 12,000 serious injuries since 2020. That's not counting the psychological trauma to families, the long-term medical costs, or the operational security compromises. The numbers hit Michael like a physical blow. 3,000 dead soldiers. 3,000, Captain Barnes's 3,000 families, destroyed by corporate greed. Those soldiers were someone's children. Isabella added, her voice thick with emotion. Someone's parents, someone's siblings. They trusted their equipment to protect them, just like my father did. Michael felt something harden inside his chest, the same cold resolve that had carried him through the darkest missions of his military career. Sophie was his priority, would always be his priority, but she would grow up in a world where corporations could murder soldiers for profit, unless someone stood up to stop them. "What do you need from us?" he asked. Brennan smiled for the first time since entering the room, and it transformed his entire face. Testimony before the committee, detailed statements about everything that happened tonight, and patience while we build a case that will put these people away for the rest of their lives. And in the meantime, you disappear. New identities, new location, federal marshals, service protection, until the trials are over. Michael felt his carefully constructed life in Cedar Falls slipping away like sand through his fingers. The house he had bought for Sophie, the school where she was finally making friends, the quiet routine that had given them both stability after Sarah's death. All of it would have to be abandoned. "Daddy." Sophie's voice was drowsy but concerned. "Are we going on a trip?" Michael stroked her hair gently. "Maybe, sweetheart. Would that be okay with you?" "As long as we're together," Sophie said, with the simple trust that children have in their parents. "Where we go doesn't matter as long as you're there." The pure faith in her voice nearly broke Michael's heart. She had already lost her mother, had already been uprooted from everything familiar when they moved to Cedar Falls. Now she would have to start over again, all because her father had chosen to get involved in something that should have been left to someone else. But as he looked across the room at Isabella, Ward saw the determined set of her jaw and the fire in her green eyes that reminded him so much of her father. Michael knew he had made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the cost was higher than anyone should have to pay. "Mr. Brennan," Isabella said, "when do we start?" "We already have," Brennan replied, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Senator Williams now to brief her on the situation. She'll want to speak with both of you personally before we move forward." As Brennan stepped outside to make his call, Webb began gathering his papers and documents. "I'll need to make arrangements for protective custody and new documentation," he said to Michael. "It's going to be a complicated process." "How long before we can go home?" Sophie asked, her voice small and tired. Michael exchanged a look with Isabella, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in her eyes. Home. Where was home when everywhere you had ever lived was no longer safe? "I don't know, baby," he said honestly. "But wherever we end up, we'll make it home together." Detective Morrison stood up, his joints creaking after the long night. "Mr. Kane, for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing tonight. And if there's anything the Cedar Falls Police Department can do to help you, just say the word." "Thank you, Detective. That means a lot." Morrison nodded and headed for the door, pausing to look back one more time. "Take care of that little girl, Mr. Kane. She's lucky to have a father like you." As Morrison left, Michael found himself alone in the interview room with Isabella and Sophie. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across their faces. But for the first time all night, the atmosphere felt calm rather than threatening. "Miss Ward," Michael said quietly, "I want you to know that your father would be proud of what you're doing. This took real courage." Isabella wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her attempts at composure. He always said that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing the right thing even when you were terrified. Smart man. He was. I just wish he was here to see this through to the end. Michael shifted Sophie slightly in his arms, feeling the solid weight of her small body against his chest. He is here. In you, in the fight you're carrying on for him. That's how we honor the dead, by making sure their sacrifices weren't meaningless. Brennan returned from his phone call with an expression that was both grim and satisfied. Senator Williams is convening an emergency session of the Armed Services Committee for Monday morning. She wants both of your testimonies on the record before Blackwater has a chance to mount a defense. That's 3 days from now, Webb noted. Can we keep everyone safe that long? We're going to find out, Brennan replied. The Marshal's Service is sending a team to escort you to a safe house. You'll be completely isolated until the hearings begin. Sophie looked up at Michael with confused eyes. Daddy, what's a safe house? It's like a special hotel, sweetheart. A place where people go when they need to be protected. From the bad people, from the bad people. Sophie considered this for a moment, then nodded with the adaptability that children possess. Okay. Can we get ice cream at the special hotel? Despite everything that had happened, despite the danger they were walking into and the uncertainty of their future, Michael found himself laughing. I'll see what I can do about that ice cream, baby. As they waited for the federal marshals to arrive, Michael looked around the interview room that had become the epicenter of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. In a few hours, this would all feel like a dream, like something that had happened to someone else in some other life. But it was real, and there was no going back. Sophie fell asleep again in his arms as the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the small window. She had no idea that her life had just changed forever, that the quiet existence they had built together was about to be replaced by something far more dangerous and uncertain. But maybe Michael thought as he watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe Sophie needed to see that sometimes her father was more than just a plumber who fixed broken pipes. Maybe she needed to see that, when the world demanded heroes, some people answered the call. The federal marshals arrived just as the sun cleared the horizon, professional and efficient in their dark suits and serious expressions. They had new identities, prepared new documentation, a safe house in a location they wouldn't reveal until they were already on the road. As they prepared to leave the police station, Isabella caught Michael's arm. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Michael looked at her one more time, seeing her father's courage reflected in her green eyes, and knew that whatever happened next, they had already won the most important victory. They had chosen to fight, and sometimes that was enough. The safe house turned out to be a sprawling ranch-style home nestled in the rolling hills of West Virginia, surrounded by enough forest and open land that no one could approach without being seen from miles away. Michael carried Sophie from the unmarked government sedan while she slept against his shoulder, her small hand clutching the stuffed elephant that had somehow survived the chaos of the past 48 hours. Deputy Marshal Rebecca Santos, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp, dark eyes, and the kind of controlled movement that spoke of serious tactical training, led them through the front door into a world that was both luxurious and fortress-like. The windows were bulletproof, the walls reinforced with steel plating, hidden behind elegant wood paneling, and every room had multiple exit routes that weren't immediately obvious to casual observation. "This place is designed to be invisible from satellite surveillance," Santos explained as she showed them through the main living area. "Solar panels are hidden under specialized roofing materials, and all communications are encrypted and routed through multiple secure servers. As far as the outside world is concerned, this house doesn't exist. Isabella walked through the space with the wide-eyed expression of someone who had never imagined that such places were real. The kitchen was fully stocked, the bedrooms comfortable but Spartan, and the basement had been converted into what looked like a military command center, complete with communications equipment and monitoring stations. "How long have we been here?" Sophie mumbled sleepily as Michael carried her toward one of the bedrooms. "We just got here, sweetheart. This is where we're going to stay for a few days while some very important people have some very important meetings." Sophie lifted her head to look around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, with the quick adaptability that had gotten her through so many changes in her young life. "It's nice," she said diplomatically, "but it doesn't smell like home." Michael felt his heart clench at her innocent observation. Home. The house in Cedar Falls that they would probably never see again, with Sophie's artwork on the refrigerator, and the garden they had planted together last spring. All of it was gone now, sacrificed on the altar of justice and honor. "We'll make it smell like home," he promised, settling her into a bed that was larger and more comfortable than anything they had owned in their previous life. "And maybe when this is all over, we'll find a new place that can be home for both of us. With a yard for a dog." Michael smiled despite everything. "Maybe with a yard for a dog." Santos reappeared in the doorway as Sophie drifted back to sleep. "There's a secure phone line in the study if you need to make any calls. And the kitchen is fully stocked. Help yourselves to anything." "What about going outside?" Michael asked. "Supervised walks within the immediate perimeter are fine, but no one leaves the property without escort, and no one goes anywhere alone. We've had 3 teams of professional contractors attempting to locate you since yesterday morning." Michael felt the familiar cold settle in his stomach. "How close have they gotten?" "Not close enough to matter, but close enough to remind us that we're dealing with serious people with serious resources. Blackwater Industries has some very expensive friends in the private security world." In the main living room, Isabella was sitting on a leather couch with her laptop open, typing furiously, while surrounded by stacks of documents and legal papers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had the focused intensity of someone who was operating on caffeine and pure determination. "Working late?" Michael asked, settling into a chair across from her. "Working while I still can," she replied without looking up from her screen. "Thomas Brennan called an hour ago. Blackwater's legal team filed injunctions in 3 different federal courts trying to block the congressional hearings. They're claiming that the documents were obtained illegally and that releasing them would compromise ongoing military operations." "Can they do that?" "They can try. But Marcus Webb thinks we have a strong case for whistleblower protection, especially given the evidence of corruption. The problem is that legal challenges can drag on for months, and Blackwater knows that time is on their side." Michael watched her work, noting the determined set of her jaw and the way her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. She reminded him of her father in that moment, completely focused on the mission, refusing to be distracted by obstacles or setbacks. "Isabella," he said quietly, "can I ask you something personal?" She looked up from her laptop, her green eyes reflecting exhaustion, but also unwavering resolve. "Of course. What made you decide to take this on? I mean, you could have just filed the documents with the appropriate authorities and walked away. You didn't have to put yourself in the line of fire like this." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to a framed photograph on the side table that showed a Marine captain in dress blues standing next to a young woman in a graduation gown. "My father used to say that some fights choose you," she said finally. "You can try to walk away, try to live a quiet life, and pretend that evil doesn't exist, but eventually it finds you anyway. And when it does, you have two choices. You can be a victim or you can be a warrior. And you chose warrior. I chose to honor his memory by making sure his death wasn't meaningless. Those documents don't just prove that Blackwater killed my father. They prove that the people who were supposed to protect our soldiers sold them out for money. How do I walk away from that? Michael understood completely. It was the same logic that had driven him to intervene at Tony's diner, the same sense of honor and duty that had defined his military career. Some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences, and some debts could never be ignored. For what it's worth, he said, I think your father would be proud of what you're doing. I hope so. Some days I'm not sure if I'm honoring his memory or just trying to ease my own guilt for not being there when he needed me. Guilt? Isabella closed her laptop and leaned back against the couch cushions, suddenly looking older than her 30 years. He called me the night before his last deployment. Said he had some concerns about his unit's equipment, wanted to know if I thought he should file a formal complaint. I told him to trust the system to go through proper channels to give the military bureaucracy a chance to fix things internally. Michael felt his chest tighten as he began to understand the weight she had been carrying. You couldn't have known what would happen. Couldn't I? I'm a lawyer, Michael. I knew how those systems work, how easy it is for complaints to get buried or ignored. I should have told him to make noise, to go public, to do whatever it took to protect himself and his men. Instead, I gave him advice that got him killed. The raw pain in her voice reminded Michael of his own guilt over Sarah's death, the way he had second-guessed every decision during her final months. Grief had a way of turning every choice into a potential mistake, every word into a possible failure. Isabella, listen to me, he said firmly. Your father was a Marine officer. He understood risk, understood the cost of military service. He made his own choices based on his own judgment. You didn't kill him. Blackwater Industries did. I know that intellectually, but knowing something and feeling it are two different things. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people bonded by loss and driven by a shared need for justice. Outside, Michael could hear the faint sounds of night in the West Virginia mountains. Owls calling, leaves rustling in the wind, the distant sound of water running over stones. Deputy Marshal Santos appeared in the doorway with a secure phone in her hand. Mr. Kane, Thomas Brennan would like to speak with you. Michael took the phone, noting the weight of the encryption hardware built into the device. Mr. Brennan, Michael, I hope you and Sophie are settling in comfortably. I know this isn't easy, but it's absolutely necessary for your safety. We're managing. What's the latest on the congressional hearings? Brennan's voice carried a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Good news and bad news. The good news is that Senator Williams has fast-tracked the committee hearing for Tuesday morning, and the Justice Department has agreed to provide additional security for all witnesses. The bad news is that we've identified at least 6 separate teams of private contractors who are actively hunting for both you and Miss Ward. Michael felt his blood run cold. 6 teams. Blackwater is pulling out all the stops. They've hired every major private security firm on the East Coast, and they're coordinating their search efforts through a centralized command structure. This isn't just corporate intimidation anymore. This is a military-style operation. What kind of resources are we talking about? Approximately 200 personnel, unlimited financial backing, and access to surveillance technology that most government agencies would envy. They've been tracking credit card usage, phone records, travel patterns, even analyzing social media posts from your friends and family members looking for clues about your location. Michael thought about Sophie sleeping peacefully in the next room, completely unaware that hundreds of people were actively trying to find and harm them. How secure is this location? Very secure, but not impregnable. The Marshals Service has protocols in place for exactly this type of situation, but we're dealing with adversaries who have resources that most criminals don't possess. What do you need from us? Complete cooperation and absolute adherence to security protocols. No phone calls to friends or family, no internet usage outside of secured channels, no contact with the outside world unless it's cleared through Marshal Santos. These people are very good at what they do, and one mistake could compromise everything. After ending the call with Brennan, Michael found Isabella still working on her laptop, though now she was reviewing what looked like legal briefs rather than typing new content. "Everything okay?" she asked without looking up. "Define okay," Michael replied, settling back into his chair. "Apparently, Blackwater has hired half the private security industry to hunt us down." Isabella's fingers paused over her keyboard. "How many people are we talking about?" 200, according to Brennan. Jesus. Isabella finally looked up, her face pale. "That's not corporate damage control, that's a war." "Yeah, well, we're fighting people who have billions of dollars at stake. I guess we should have expected them to take it seriously. Should we be worried about this place being found?" Michael considered the question, drawing on his military experience to assess their situation. "This house is well hidden and defensible, but it's not invisible. If they throw enough resources at the problem, eventually, they'll narrow down the possibilities. The question is whether we can get to the congressional hearing before that happens. And if we can't..." Michael thought about Sophie, about the trust in her eyes when she said that as long as they were together, everything would be okay. "Then we figure out another way to get the truth out." Deputy Marshal Santos entered the room carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had received troubling news. "I just got off the phone with our field office," she said, handing them the coffee. "We've had to relocate 3 other witness families in the past 12 hours. Blackwater's contractors are being very aggressive in their search efforts." "Aggressive how?" Isabella asked. "Breaking into homes, interrogating neighbors, bribing local officials for information. They're not trying to be subtle anymore. They're trying to be thorough." Michael sipped his coffee and considered their options. Running was always possible, but running with an 8-year-old daughter severely limited his tactical flexibility. Fighting was also possible, but it would mean putting Sophie in even greater danger. "What kind of backup do we have if this location is compromised?" he asked. Santos pulled out a tablet and showed them what looked like tactical maps of the surrounding area. 2 extraction routes through the mountains, helicopter landing zones at 3 different locations, and a backup safe house approximately 60 miles north of here. Plus, we have a rapid response team stationed 20 minutes away. "How many people on the response team?" 8 marshals, all with military backgrounds. Former Rangers, SEALs, Marines. They know what they're doing. 8 against 200, Isabella observed. "Those aren't great odds." "The idea is to avoid a confrontation entirely," Santos replied. "But if it comes to a fight, we're prepared." Michael studied the tactical maps, automatically cataloging defensive positions, escape routes, and potential ambush sites. The old skills were coming back to him, whether he wanted them to or not, the mental processes that had kept him alive in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. "Marshal Santos," he said carefully, "has anyone considered the possibility that this might be exactly what Blackwater wants?" Santos looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe the point isn't to capture us before the hearing. Maybe the point is to make us disappear permanently. If we're killed while trying to evade capture, there are no witnesses to testify, no documents to be entered into evidence, no congressional investigation." The implications of Michael's words settled over the room like a dark cloud. Isabella's face went white, and Santos immediately began reaching for her secure communication device. You think they're planning to hit this location? Santos asked. I think they're planning to end this problem permanently, and we're the problem, Michael replied. The question is how far they're willing to go to solve it. Santos was already on her secure radio speaking in the clipped tones of military communication. Base, this is Safe House Alpha. Request immediate tactical assessment of potential hostile approach routes. Priority 1. While Santos coordinated with her backup team, Michael moved to the window and carefully peered through the bulletproof glass at the surrounding landscape. The house was situated on a small rise, providing good sightlines in all directions, but the heavy forest cover meant that a determined enemy could get within a few hundred yards without being detected. Michael, Isabella said quietly. Should we wake Sophie? Get her ready to move? Michael considered the question. On one hand, having Sophie awake and ready to move quickly could save precious seconds if they needed to evacuate. On the other hand, she was exhausted and traumatized, and she needed whatever rest she could get. Not yet, he decided, but have her clothes and shoes ready just in case. Isabella nodded and disappeared into the bedroom where Sophie was sleeping. Michael could hear her moving quietly around the room, gathering items and organizing them for a quick departure. Santos finished her radio conversation and returned with an expression that was both grim and determined. My team is going to full alert status. They're repositioning to cover all approach routes, and we're getting real-time satellite surveillance of the area. What about evacuation? If we need to move, we can have a helicopter here in 15 minutes. But moving at night through mountainous terrain with a child is dangerous under the best of circumstances. Michael weighed their options, drawing on years of tactical experience to evaluate risks and benefits. Stay and defend a fixed position, or move to an unknown location with limited preparation time. Both choices carried significant dangers. What's your professional recommendation? He asked Santos. Honestly, I think we stay put until morning, unless we have definitive evidence of an imminent threat. This house is better defended than any location we could reach quickly, and my team knows the terrain. And if they do come, Santos's smile was cold and professional, then they're going to discover that federal marshals don't go down easy. Isabella returned from the bedroom carrying a small backpack that presumably contained Sophie's essential items. She's still sleeping, but everything's ready if we need to move quickly. Good thinking, Michael said. How are you holding up? Scared, Isabella admitted. But also angry. These people killed my father, and now they're trying to kill us to cover it up. At some point, enough is enough. Michael recognized the tone in her voice, the same cold anger that had driven him through some of his most dangerous missions. It was useful in combat, but it could also lead to reckless decisions if not carefully controlled. Isabella, I need you to promise me something, he said seriously. Whatever happens here tonight, whatever kind of fight we end up in your job, is to protect yourself and help me protect Sophie. Don't try to be a hero. What about you? Are you going to try to be a hero? Michael thought about his daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, trusting him to keep her safe no matter what. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure Sophie gets to grow up. Santos's radio crackled to life, and her expression immediately went tense as she listened to the incoming transmission. Copy that, Overwatch. How many vehicles? Michael felt his stomach drop. What is it? 3 vehicles approaching from the south. No headlights, moving in tactical formation. Santos was already moving toward the communications center in the basement. Could be legitimate traffic, but at 2 a.m. on a backcountry road, probably not. How long until they reach us? Maybe 10 minutes at their current speed. Michael was already moving toward Sophie's bedroom. Wake her up. We're leaving. Isabella grabbed her laptop and documents, while Michael gently shook Sophie awake. His daughter's eyes opened immediately, focusing on his face with the quick alertness that she had developed during their previous relocations. "Time to go, sweetheart," he said softly, helping her into her shoes and jacket. "Remember what we practiced. Stay close to Daddy and do exactly what I tell you." Sophie nodded completely, trusting, despite her obvious confusion. "Are the bad people coming?" "Maybe, but we're not going to wait around to find out." Santos reappeared with night vision goggles and what looked like military-grade communication equipment. "Helicopter is inbound ETA 12 minutes. We need to reach the landing zone before those vehicles get close enough to interdict." "How far to the LZ?" Michael asked, picking up Sophie and settling her on his hip. "Half a mile through the woods, mostly downhill. There's a trail, but it's going to be dark and rough." Michael looked at his daughter, calculating whether she could handle a half-mile hike through mountain forest at night, while potentially under fire. She was strong for her age and had good endurance, but this was beyond anything a child should have to endure. "I'll carry her," he decided. "That's going to slow us down," Santos pointed out. "Then we better get moving." They left through the back door of the house, Santos leading the way with her night vision equipment, while Michael followed with Sophie in his arms. Isabella brought up the rear, carrying her precious documents and laptop in a waterproof bag. The forest was pitch black under the thick canopy, and Michael had to rely entirely on Santos's guidance as they made their way down the narrow trail. Sophie buried her face against his shoulder and didn't make a sound, though he could feel her small body trembling with fear. "How much further?" he whispered after what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the darkness. "Maybe 200 yards, Santos replied softly. "I can see the landing zone through the trees." That's when they heard the sound of vehicles stopping near the house they had just abandoned, followed by the distant crack of doors slamming and voices giving orders in professional military tones. "Move faster!" Santos urged, breaking into a jog despite the treacherous terrain. Michael adjusted his grip on Sophie and pushed himself to keep up, feeling branches tear at his clothes and roots catch at his feet. Behind them, Isabella was breathing hard, but keeping pace, driven by the same desperate need to reach safety. The sound of the approaching helicopter became audible just as they reached the edge of the landing zone. A small meadow carved out of the forest that was barely large enough for the aircraft to land. Santos immediately began signaling with a tactical flashlight, sending a coded message to the pilot. 30 seconds, she announced. That's when the shooting started. Muzzle flashes lit up the forest behind them as automatic weapons fire raked through the trees, bullets whining overhead and splintering bark from the ancient oaks and maples. Michael immediately dropped to the ground, rolling to shield Sophie with his body, while Santos returned fire with her sidearm. "Stay down!" he shouted to Isabella, who had thrown herself behind a fallen log. "Don't move until I tell you!" The helicopter appeared overhead like an angel of mercy, its searchlight illuminating the landing zone while its door gunner laid down suppressing fire toward the tree line. The pilot brought the aircraft down in a controlled crash, landing the skids hitting the ground hard enough to bounce before settling. "Go, go, go," Santos shouted, providing covering fire as Michael sprinted toward the helicopter with Sophie clutched against his chest. Isabella was right behind them, her legal training apparently having included some basic tactical awareness, as she kept low and moved in a zigzag pattern that made her a harder target. Michael reached the helicopter first, literally throwing Sophie through the open door before diving in after her. Isabella arrived seconds later, and Santos backed toward the aircraft while continuing to return fire against their pursuers. "We're up!" the pilot shouted, pulling pitch before Santos was completely aboard. The helicopter rose into the night sky just as more muzzle flashes erupted from the forest bullets, sparking off the aircraft's armored hull. Michael held Sophie tight against his chest, feeling her small body shaking with terror as the sound of gunfire faded below them. "Is everyone okay?" Santos asked, checking each of them for injuries. "We're good," Michael replied, though his heart was still pounding like a trip hammer. "Sophie, are you hurt?" "No, Daddy," she whispered against his ear. "But I'm really scared." "I know, sweetheart. But we're safe now. The bad people can't reach us up here." Isabella was staring out the window at the receding lights of their attackers, her face pale but her expression determined. "They really tried to kill us." "Yeah," Michael agreed grimly. "They really did." Santos was already on her radio coordinating with ground teams and updating their command structure. "This is Guardian Angel. Package is secure, but Safe House Alpha is compromised. Request immediate tactical response to grid coordinates." As the helicopter carried them through the night toward an uncertain destination, Michael realized that they had crossed a line from which there was no return. This wasn't just about corporate corruption anymore. This was war. And in war there were no innocent bystanders. But looking down at Sophie's trusting face, feeling her small hand grip his shirt, with absolute faith that he would protect her, Michael knew that some wars were worth fighting. Some truths were worth dying for, and some debts could only be paid in full. The helicopter set down on the roof of a federal building in downtown Washington, D.C., as the first pale light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky. Michael carried Sophie down from the aircraft, her small body finally relaxed in sleep despite the chaos of the night. She had fallen asleep during the flight, exhausted by fear and adrenaline, trusting completely in her father's ability to keep her safe. Deputy Marshal Santos led them through a maze of corridors and security checkpoints that spoke of the highest levels of federal protection. Isabella walked beside Michael, her laptop bag clutched against her chest. Like armor, her green eyes reflecting the same determination that had driven her father through his final mission. "Where are we?" Isabella asked, as they entered an elevator that required 2 separate keycards to operate. "Secure witness facility," Santos replied. "This is where we bring people when their testimony is important enough to justify presidential-level protection." The elevator opened onto a floor that looked more like a luxury hotel than a government facility. Comfortable suites, a common area with leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Capitol building, and a kitchen that was clearly designed for long-term occupancy. "How long will we be here?" Michael asked, settling Sophie onto a couch where she could continue sleeping. "Until Tuesday morning," Santos said. "The congressional hearing has been moved up to 10 a.m. Senator Williams wants your testimony on the record before Blackwater can mount any more legal challenges." Thomas Brennan emerged from one of the suites, looking like he hadn't slept in days, his usually immaculate appearance rumpled and his sharp gray eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But there was something else in his expression, a satisfaction that spoke of battles won and enemies defeated. "You made it," he said with obvious relief. "When we lost contact with the safe house, we feared the worst." "We had some uninvited visitors," Michael replied dryly. "How did they find us so quickly?" Brennan's expression darkened. "We're still investigating, but it appears that Blackwater has access to surveillance resources that shouldn't be available to private contractors. Satellite imagery, NSA communication, intercepts possibly even real-time GPS tracking of federal vehicles. Someone in the government is helping them," Isabella said, her voice hard with anger. "Multiple someones and at very high levels, which is why Senator Williams has decided to move aggressively. We're not just going after Blackwater anymore. We're going after everyone who enabled them." Isabella's lawyer, Marcus Webb, appeared from another suite carrying a stack of papers and wearing the expression of someone who had just won the legal lottery. "Isabella, you need to see this. We just received copies of Blackwater's internal communications from the past 72 hours. "How did you get those?" Michael asked suspiciously. Webb's smile was sharp as a razor. Sometimes the best way to fight corruption is with more corruption. Apparently, Blackwater has some employees who aren't happy about attempted murder charges. Isabella took the papers and began reading, her eyes widening with each page. This is incredible. They're not just trying to cover up the defective equipment. They're planning to blame the entire thing on foreign intelligence services. "What do you mean?" Michael asked. "According to these communications, Blackwater is prepared to claim that the documents were fabricated by Chinese intelligence as part of a campaign to undermine American defense contractors. They're going to say that my father was a traitor who was working with foreign agents." Michael felt rage surge through him like molten steel. "They're going to destroy a dead man's reputation to save their own skins." "Not if we stop them first," Brennan said grimly, "which is why tomorrow's hearing is so crucial. Once your testimony is on the congressional record, it becomes much harder for them to spin this as foreign manipulation." Sophie stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open to focus on Michael's face. "Daddy, where are we now?" "Washington, D.C., sweetheart. Remember I told you about the place where all the important government people work?" Sophie sat up and looked around the luxurious suite with wide eyes. "Are we important government people now?" "No, baby. But we're here to talk to the important government people about some very serious things. About the bad people who tried to hurt us." Michael exchanged a look with Isabella, seeing his own protective instincts reflected in her expression. Sophie had seen too much, experienced too much trauma for a child her age, but she had also shown remarkable resilience and courage. "Yes, about the bad people, and about making sure they can't hurt anyone else." Senator Patricia Williams arrived an hour later with an entourage that included committee staff, legal advisors, and what Michael recognized as a full security detail. Williams herself was a woman in her 70s with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of political battles. "Mr. Kane," she said, extending her hand with a firm grip that spoke of genuine strength. "Thank you for your service to this country, both in the military and in what you're doing now." "Thank you, Senator. Though I have to say, this isn't exactly what I signed up for when I decided to have pizza with my daughter." Williams's laugh was warm and genuine. "The best heroes are usually the reluctant ones. And Miss Ward," she turned to Isabella, "your grandmother would be so proud of what you're accomplishing here. Margaret Barnes was one of the finest public servants I ever had the privilege to work with." Isabella's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her grandmother. "Thank you, Senator. That means everything to me." William settled into a chair across from them, her expression growing serious as she shifted into business mode. "I want you both to understand exactly what tomorrow's hearing represents. This isn't just about punishing Blackwater Industries for corporate malfeasance. This is about exposing a level of corruption that threatens the fundamental integrity of our military procurement system." "How high does it go?" Michael asked. "Higher than anyone wants to admit. We have evidence of bribery and conspiracy that reaches into the Pentagon, the State Department, and at least 3 congressional offices. This hearing is going to destroy careers and potentially bring down some very powerful people." Brennan pulled out his tablet and showed them what looked like an organizational chart connecting dozens of names and entities. Blackwater wasn't acting alone. They were part of a consortium of defense contractors who were systematically defrauding the government while paying off officials to look the other way. "How much money are we talking about?" Isabella asked. Conservative estimate approximately $4 billion over the past 5 years. And that's just what we can prove so far. The number was staggering, representing not just massive theft of taxpayer money, but the cost in human lives that such corruption had enabled. Michael thought about Captain Barnes, about the thousands of other soldiers who had died, because profit margins mattered more than protection. What happens to the people responsible? Sophie asked quietly from her position on the couch. Williams looked at her with surprised respect. Well, young lady, the people who did these bad things are going to face justice. Some will go to prison, some will lose their jobs, and all of them will have to answer for what they've done. Good, Sophie said, with the absolute moral certainty that only children possess. Bad people should be punished. Yes, they should, Williams agreed. And thanks to your daddy and Miss Ward, they will be. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and briefings. Michael and Isabella rehearsed their testimony with committee staff, reviewing documents and timeline details until every fact was locked in their memories. Webb worked with congressional lawyers to ensure that all evidence would be properly admitted into the record, while Brennan coordinated with law enforcement agencies to prepare for the arrests that would follow the hearing. As evening approached, Michael found himself standing at one of the large windows overlooking the Capitol building, Sophie beside him on a chair so she could see out. The dome was illuminated against the darkening sky, a symbol of democracy and justice that suddenly felt more meaningful than it ever had before. "Daddy, is that where we're going tomorrow?" Sophie asked, pointing at the Capitol. "Yes, sweetheart. That's where people go to tell the truth about important things." "Will the bad people be there too?" Michael considered how to answer that question. Some of the bad people would indeed be there either as witnesses or as targets of the investigation. But explaining the complexities of congressional hearings and criminal justice to an 8-year-old seemed impossible. "Some of them might be," he said finally, "but they won't be able to hurt us anymore. There will be lots of good people there to make sure everyone is safe." Isabella joined them at the window, her reflection in the glass, showing exhaustion, but also determination. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" she asked Michael. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this." "What about you?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also excited. For the first time since my father died, I feel like I'm actually doing something meaningful to honor his memory." "You've been honoring his memory all along," Michael said. "Everything you've done, every risk you've taken, every document you've preserved, all of it has been about making sure his death wasn't meaningless. Do you think it will make a difference? I mean, really make a difference?" Michael looked out at the Capitol dome, thinking about all the soldiers who had trusted their lives to equipment that they believed would protect them. "I think your father would say that sometimes you have to have faith that doing the right thing will lead to the right outcome even when you can't see how." That night, Sophie fell asleep between Michael and Isabella on the large couch in the common area, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Michael watched her peaceful face and marveled at her resilience, her ability to adapt to circumstances that would have broken many adults. "She's remarkable," Isabella said softly, stroking Sophie's hair with gentle fingers. "She's had to grow up too fast," Michael replied. "Lost her mother when she was 5, got uprooted from everything familiar when we moved to Cedar Falls, and now this. Sometimes I wonder if I'm asking too much of her." "You're not. You're showing her that there are things worth fighting for, causes worth taking risks for. That's a gift, Michael, even if it doesn't feel like one right now." "What happens after tomorrow? Assuming everything goes according to plan, and the bad guys get arrested, and justice is served. What then?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I honestly don't know. My old life is gone just like yours. I can't go back to small-town law practice after this. Too many people know who I am now, too many enemies who might want revenge. So what will you do? Maybe continue investigating defense contractor corruption. There are other companies like Blackwater, other officials taking bribes, other soldiers dying because of defective equipment. Maybe this is just the beginning. Michael understood the impulse. Once you opened your eyes to this level of systemic corruption, it became impossible to ignore. But he also thought about Sophie, about his responsibility as a father to provide stability and safety. I keep thinking about what kind of world I want Sophie to grow up in, he said. A world where corporations can murder soldiers for profit, or a world where people like us stand up and fight back. And which world do you want? I want the world where we fight back. Even if it's harder, even if it's dangerous. I want her to know that her father was someone who did the right thing when it mattered. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold with autumn frost covering the windows of their secure suite. Michael woke early to find Sophie already awake, sitting in her pajamas and staring out at the Capitol building. "Big day, huh?" he said, settling beside her. "Are you scared, Daddy?" Michael considered the question seriously. Was he scared? Absolutely. Scared of testifying before Congress, scared of the media attention that would follow, scared of the ongoing danger to his family. But he was also something else. Determined. A little scared, he admitted, but also ready. Sometimes being scared means you're about to do something important. Mommy used to say that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right, even when you are afraid. Michael felt his throat tighten at the mention of Sarah. Your mommy was a smart lady. She would be proud of you, wouldn't she, for helping people and fighting the bad guys? I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. 2 hours later, they were in a convoy of black SUVs heading toward the Capitol building, surrounded by enough federal security to protect a head of state. Michael wore his best suit, the one he had bought for Sarah's funeral and hadn't worn since, while Sophie sat beside him in a blue dress that made her look older than her 8 years. Isabella rode in the lead vehicle with Senator Williams and the committee staff reviewing her testimony one final time. Through the bulletproof windows, Michael could see crowds of reporters and protesters gathered outside the Capitol, held back by police barriers and federal security. There are a lot of people, Sophie observed, pressing her face to the window. They're here because what we're doing today is important, Michael explained. Sometimes when people try to fix big problems, other people want to watch and see what happens. The convoy pulled up to a secure entrance away from the media crowds, and they were quickly escorted through corridors lined with marble statues and historical paintings. The Hart Senate office building felt like a temple to democracy, all soaring ceilings and echoing footsteps. The hearing room was larger than Michael had expected, with rows of seats for spectators and a raised dais where the senators would sit in judgment. Television cameras were positioned throughout the room, and technicians were testing sound equipment and lighting systems. This is really happening, Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, it is, Senator Williams replied, appearing beside them with her usual commanding presence. And thanks to both of you, justice is about to be served. As the hearing room filled with spectators, media representatives, and congressional staff, Michael noticed several familiar faces among the crowd. Agent Chen sat in the back row, flanked by FBI agents, and looking like she had aged a decade in the past week. Thomas Brennan took a seat near the front, his tablet and documentation at the ready. But it was the group of men in expensive suits sitting in the section reserved for Blackwater Industries that drew Michael's attention. Corporate lawyers, public relations specialists, and executives who had probably never been within 1,000 miles of a battlefield, but had profited from the blood of soldiers. All rise for the Honorable Committee on Armed Services, the clerk announced, and the room fell silent as Senator Williams and her colleagues took their seats. This hearing will come to order, Williams said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. We are here today to investigate allegations of fraud, corruption, and criminal conspiracy involving Blackwater Industries and various government officials. Our first witness is Miss Isabella Ward, daughter of the late Captain James Barnes, United States Marine Corps. Isabella walked to the witness table with her head held high, her hands steady as she was sworn in to tell the truth. Michael felt a surge of pride as he watched her take her seat, knowing that her father would have been incredibly proud of this moment. Miss Ward. Senator Williams began. Please tell the committee how you came to possess the documents that form the basis of this investigation. For the next 2 hours, Isabella laid out the case against Blackwater Industries with the precision of a prosecutor and the passion of a daughter seeking justice for her father's death. She presented financial records showing bribes paid to government officials, communication logs revealing the conspiracy to cover up equipment defects, and test results proving that Blackwater executives knew their armor was failing in the field. The Blackwater legal team tried to object on grounds of national security and document classification, but Senator Williams shut them down with the authority of congressional oversight. Each piece of evidence was methodically entered into the record, building an unshakable foundation for criminal prosecution. When Isabella finished her testimony, the hearing room was silent except for the clicking of camera shutters and the scratching of reporters' pens. She had done more than just present evidence. She had honored her father's memory and given voice to every soldier who had died because of corporate greed. Mr. Kane, Senator Williams called, please approach the witness table. Michael kissed Sophie's forehead and walked to the front of the room, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, he thought about Captain Barnes, about the moment in Afghanistan when a good man had risked everything to save a stranger's life. Mr. Kane, Senator Williams began after he was seated. You served with Captain Barnes in Afghanistan, is that correct? Yes, ma'am. He was the Marine liaison officer attached to my SEAL team during Operation Fallen Angel. Tell the committee about Captain Barnes's character and service. Michael looked out at the crowded hearing room, seeing Isabella's encouraging nod and Sophie's trusting smile. Captain Barnes was the finest officer I ever served with. He was brave, dedicated, and completely committed to the welfare of his men. He saved my life during an enemy ambush, taking shrapnel wounds to pull me out of a kill zone. And how did Captain Barnes die? He was killed when his body armor failed to stop enemy rounds that it should have easily defeated. Armor manufactured by Blackwater Industries using substandard materials and falsified test results. For the next hour, Michael detailed everything that had happened since that night at Tony's diner. The confrontation with Blackwater operatives, the attempts to silence Isabella, the corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. His military training served him well, allowing him to present facts clearly and calmly, despite the emotional weight of his testimony. When he finished, Senator Williams leaned forward with the expression of someone who had heard enough evidence to render judgment. Mr. Kane, in your professional opinion as a former Navy SEAL, how many American soldiers have died because of Blackwater Industries' criminal conspiracy? Michael thought about the thousands of service members who had trusted their lives to equipment that was designed to fail, about families destroyed by corporate greed masquerading as patriotism. Conservative estimate, Senator, at least 3,000 dead, 12,000 wounded, and that's just what we know about. The number hit the hearing room like a physical blow. Gasps echoed from the spectator section, and even some of the senators looked stunned by the scope of the tragedy. Thank you, Mr. Kane. You and Miss Ward have performed a great service for your country today. As Michael returned to his seat beside Sophie, he saw FBI agents moving through the spectator section with arrest warrants. The Blackwater executives were taken into custody first, followed by several men who appeared to be government officials. Even Agent Chen was quietly escorted from the room, her career and freedom forfeit for her role in the cover-up. "Is it over, Daddy?" Sophie asked quietly as they watched the arrests unfold. "The hearing is over," Michael replied. "But the work of justice is just beginning." Senator Williams gavelled the hearing to a close, but not before making a statement that would dominate news coverage for weeks to come. The evidence presented today reveals a level of corruption that strikes at the very heart of our military's ability to protect those who serve. Blackwater Industries and their co-conspirators will face the full weight of justice, and this committee will continue its investigation until every criminal is held accountable. As they left the Capitol building, through the same secure entrance, Michael noticed that the crowds of protesters and reporters had grown substantially. Word of the hearing's revelations was already spreading, and the public was demanding answers. "What happens now?" Isabella asked as they settled into the secure vehicle for the ride back to their temporary housing. Thomas Brennan, who had joined them for the return trip, consulted his tablet with satisfaction. "Now we watch the dominoes fall. The Justice Department is filing RICO charges against Blackwater and 17 co-conspirators. The Pentagon is launching a full investigation of procurement procedures, and Congress is calling for hearings on defense contractor oversight." "What about us?" Michael asked. "When can we stop running?" "The immediate threat is over," Brennan replied. "With the key conspirators in custody and the evidence on the congressional record, there's no longer any point in trying to silence you. You'll still need security for a while, but you can start thinking about rebuilding your lives." 6 months later, Michael stood in the backyard of a small house in Virginia, watching Sophie play with the golden retriever puppy they had adopted from a local shelter. She had named him Captain in honor of her father's friend, who had started this entire journey. The house was modest, but comfortable, purchased with money from the Federal Witness Protection Program, and located in a quiet neighborhood where Sophie could attend a good school and make new friends. It wasn't Cedar Falls, but it was home. Isabella had moved to Washington, D.C., where she now worked as an investigator for the Senate Armed Services Committee, continuing her father's fight against defense contractor corruption. She visited often, and Sophie had come to think of her as an honorary aunt. The trials were still ongoing, but early convictions had already resulted in long prison sentences for Blackwater executives and their government conspirators. General Chen had been court-martialed and sentenced to 20 years in military prison. His niece, former Agent Chen, had received 10 years for obstruction of justice, but was eligible for early release in exchange for her cooperation. "Daddy, watch this!" Sophie called out, throwing a tennis ball for Captain to chase. The dog bounded after it with the enthusiasm that only puppies possess, his tail wagging furiously as he returned the ball to Sophie's waiting hands. Michael smiled, feeling a contentment that had been missing from his life for far too long. The quiet existence he had tried to build in Cedar Falls was gone forever. But what they had now was something better. A life with purpose, a future built on truth rather than hidden secrets. Isabella emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just received good news. "The last of the Blackwater executives just pleaded guilty," she announced. 25 to life, no possibility of parole." "Justice served," Michael replied, accepting his coffee gratefully. "Finally. Though I have to admit sometimes I still can't believe we actually did it. 2 years ago I was just a small-town lawyer trying to make sense of my father's death. Now you're one of the most effective corruption investigators in Washington," Michael finished. Your father would be incredibly proud. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy rather than grief. I think he would be, and I think he'd be proud of you too for everything you sacrificed to make this happen. Michael looked at Sophie, who was now teaching Captain to sit and stay with the patience that came naturally to children. She had grown and changed so much over the past 2 years, maturing in ways that no child should have to, but maintaining the essential goodness that made her who she was. I didn't sacrifice anything, he said. I gained everything that matters. That evening, as Sophie worked on her homework at the kitchen table and Captain slept at her feet, Michael received a phone call that would change their lives once more. Mr. Kane. The voice was unfamiliar, but carried the authority of military command. This is General Patricia Morrison, commanding officer of the Army Special Operations Command. I was wondering if you might have time to meet with me this week. What about, General? About a job offer. The Army is standing up a new unit focused on investigating defense contractor fraud and corruption. We need someone with your unique combination of military expertise and investigative experience to lead it. Michael looked at Sophie, who was concentrating intensely on her math problems with the same focus she brought to everything important in her life. A government job would mean stability, good benefits, and the chance to continue the work that had become his calling. Can I bring my daughter to the meeting? He asked. General Morrison's laugh was warm and understanding. Mr. Kane, after everything you've been through, I think we can accommodate a few unconventional requests. 2 weeks later, Michael reported for duty at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, wearing the uniform he had thought he would never put on again. Sophie started at a new school where the children of military families understood what it meant to serve something larger than yourself. The Defense Contractor Integrity Unit was small, just 12 investigators and support staff, but it was given broad authority to investigate fraud, corruption, and criminal activity throughout the military procurement system. Michael's first case involved a company that was selling defective bulletproof vests to police departments using the same playbook that Blackwater had pioneered. Isabella joined the unit as its chief legal counsel, bringing her expertise in congressional oversight and her unwavering commitment to justice. Together, they built an organization that would become the nightmare of every corrupt defense contractor in America. On the second anniversary of the night at Tony's Diner, they held a memorial service for Captain Barnes and all the soldiers who had died because of corporate greed. Sophie, now 10 years old and wise beyond her years, laid a wreath at the base of the memorial wall, while Michael and Isabella stood at attention. Do you think he knows? Sophie asked quietly as they walked away from the ceremony. Knows what, sweetheart? That we kept fighting for him. That we made sure the bad people couldn't hurt anyone else. Michael looked up at the sky where clouds were drifting across the afternoon sun like the ghosts of fallen heroes. I think he knows, and I think he's proud of what we accomplished. Good, Sophie said, with the same absolute moral certainty that had driven them through the darkest moments of their journey. Heroes should be remembered. As they walked back to their car, Captain trotting beside them on his leash, Michael reflected on how much their lives had changed since that quiet Friday night when all they wanted was pizza and ice cream. They had lost their anonymity, their safety, and their simple existence, but they had gained something infinitely more valuable. They had gained the knowledge that when evil tried to triumph, good people could stand up and fight back. They had gained the satisfaction of seeing justice served and corruption exposed. Most importantly, they had gained the respect that comes from doing the right thing even when the cost was higher than anyone should have to pay. The wrong table at Tony's Diner had become the right place to make a stand. And sometimes Michael thought, as he watched his daughter skip ahead with her dog, that was exactly how heroes were made. Not by seeking out great battles, but by refusing to walk away when great battles found them. Sophie turned back to smile at him, her face bright with the joy of a child who knew she was loved and protected, and Michael knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't bringing down Blackwater Industries or exposing government corruption. The greatest victory was raising a daughter who understood that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost.